Thanks, Senator Hirono. Senator Cotton?
Judge, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
I want to return to Senator Grassley's questions about the Durham investigation. Senator Grassley asked you if you would commit specifically to ensure that John Durham had the staff, the resources, and the time that he needed to complete that investigation. You said you didn't have the info yet, that you needed to speak to him, but you had no reason to think that him staying on was not the correct decision.
That's right, yes.
Why can't you commit specifically to saying that he will have the time, staff, and resources he needs to complete his investigation?
Well, again, it's because I'm sitting here and I don't have any information about what he needs in his resources and how and the allocation of resources. But my everything I know sitting here suggests that he should, of course, have those resources.
Judge, 2 years ago, Bill Barr made that exact commitment about the Mueller special counsel. He did not have that information. He had not consulted with the department. He was in the same posture you are. He simply said yes. Why can't you say yes today the way Bill Barr did 2 years ago?
Again, my view about every investigation and every decision I make is I have to know the facts before I can make those kind of decisions. I don't know what went into his consideration, but for myself, I have to be there and learn what's going on before I can make a decision. But as I said, I have no reason to doubt that the decision to keep him in place and to continue in his investigation was in any way wrong.
Was it wrong for Bill Barr to make that commitment 2 years ago?
As I said, Senator, I'm not going to be making judgments about my predecessors. I don't think there's any purpose in that for myself. I want you to judge me on my own record and what I do going forward.
Was it wrong for Democratic senators on this committee to repeatedly demand that Bill Barr make that commitment 2 years ago?
I think my answer would be the same.
Okay, let's turn to the death penalty. You said that you've developed great pause over it. And you said that Joe Biden expressed his opposition to the death penalty. Did Joe Biden or anyone from his administration, transition, or campaign ask you not to pursue capital punishment in cases against murderers or terrorists?
No. No.
Thank you. Judge, you spoke at the outset, as did have several other senators, about your outstanding work in the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing case, in which you were part of a team that helped to bring to justice a white supremacist mass murderer, Timothy McVeigh. He was sentenced to death. That death penalty has been carried out. Do you regret the fact that Timothy McVeigh received the death penalty and has been executed?
Look, I supported as I said in my original Senate hearing when I became a judge originally, I supported the death penalty at that time for Mr. McVeigh in that individual case. I don't have any regret, but I have developed concerns about the death penalty in the 20-some years since then. And the sources of my concern are issues of exonerations of people who have been convicted, of sort of arbitrariness and randomness of its application because of how seldom it's applied and because of its disparate impact on Black Americans and members of other communities of color. Those are the things that give me pause. And those are things that have given me pause over the last, as I thought about it over the last 20 years.
Judge, if you were confirmed as Attorney General and there was another case like Timothy McVeigh's where a white supremacist bombed a federal courthouse, killing 168 Americans, including 19 children, and your U.S. Attorney sought your approval for the death penalty, would you give him that approval?
So I think it depends on what the development of the policy is. If the president asks, or if we develop a policy about moratorium, then it would apply across the board. There's no point in having a policy if you make individual discretionary decisions. So if that's the policy, then that would be the policy.
So, Judge, you said in your opening statement, and in addition to several questions from senators, that you would strictly regulate communications between the White House, that there'd be no partisan influence. So is this a case in which there would be influence from the White House in individual cases? The U.S. Attorney was seeking the death penalty against a white supremacist domestic terrorist?
Oh, I understand the question. I'm sorry, maybe I didn't understand before. What I'm trying to say here is if there was a policy decision made by the president and announced by the president, he certainly has the authority to direct, and nothing inappropriate about it. It's within his authority to require an across-the-board moratorium. This is not, what I was talking about was not a decision by the president in any particular case or the direction of how any particular case should go forward, but of a moratorium which would apply as a policy across the board. The Supreme Court has held that the death penalty is constitutional, but it is not required. and that's within the discretion of the president.
Before we move on from the Oklahoma City case, let me just commend you again for your work on it and say that I believe Timothy McVeigh deserved the death penalty.
Thank you, Senator.
Another case involves Dylan Roof, a white supremacist from South Carolina who went into an African-American church and killed 9 African-Americans in a racially motivated terrorist attack. The Obama Department of Justice sought the death penalty against him and received it. Do you believe that was a mistake?
I'm sorry.
Do you believe it was a mistake to seek the death penalty against Dylan Roof for murdering 9 African-Americans as they worshiped in church?
I know I'm not supposed to be asking you the questions, but I have a feeling that this is still a pending matter. And if it is, I can't talk about a particular case.
In that case, let me ask you the hypothetical I did about...
I apologize for asking you because I know that's not my role.
Let's suppose that another white supremacist walks into another African-American church and murders African-Americans worshiping Christ in cold blood. The U.S. Attorney seeks the death penalty against that white supremacist. Would you approve it?
Again, Senator, I think it does depend on what policy is adopted going forward. I would not oppose a policy of the president because it is within his authority to put a moratorium on the death penalty in all cases, and instead to seek mandatory life without possibility of parole, without any consideration of the facts of any particular case.
Some on the left are calling for President Biden to grant a across-the-board commutation to all federal death row inmates to reduce their sentence to life in prison. Would you recommend to President Biden that he make such an across-the-board commutation?
So this is one of the ones that I would have to think about, and which I have not thought about. And I'd have to, consult with the administration on such an across-the-board policy. I haven't thought about that.
Thank you. I want to turn to racial equity. Do you agree that a core concept, Judge, of American law is that the government can't discriminate against a citizen on the basis of their race?
Absolutely. Equal justice under the law, written right there on the steps of the pediment above the Supreme Court.
And not only is it unlawful, it's morally wrong as well.
Yes, I think discrimination is morally wrong. Absolutely.
You're aware that President Biden has signed an executive order stating that his administration will affirmatively advance racial equity, not racial equality, but racial equity.
Yes, and I read the opening of that executive order, which defines equity as the fair and impartial treatment of every person without regard to their status, and including the individuals who have been in underserved communities where they were not accorded that before. But I don't see any distinction between in that regard. That's the definition that was included in that executive order that you're talking about.
So to you, racial equity and racial equality are the same thing?
I don't, this is a word that is defined in the executive order as I just said it. So I don't know what else. I can't give you any more than the way in which the executive order defined the term it was using.
Thank you, Judge. Judge, I want to return to where we stopped this morning, the question of racial equality, specifically race discrimination in higher education. Last year, the Department of Justice sued Yale University for discriminating against students on the basis of race. Based on Yale's own data, if you look at one of its top academic categories when you control for academic achievement, the admission rates by racial category were as follows. Asian Americans, 6%, white applicants, 8%, Hispanics, 21%, African Americans, 49%. Do you think that evidence suggests discrimination based on race in Yale's admissions process?
So again, my best recollection is that between my nomination and now, the department has made a decision about that.
The case was voluntarily dismissed on February 3rd. It's no longer a pending case.
So my recollection is correct. So these kind of cases obviously depend on application of the Supreme Court's opinion in the Gritter case and the Fisher case. And they require a lot of factual development and examination of the facts. These cases do not only depend on disparate statistics. But on all the factors, the Supreme Court instructed the lower courts and the government as to what kinds of affirmative action in higher education are permissible and which ones aren't. So I honestly can't draw any conclusions without knowing the facts of the case.
So some of that Supreme Court case law about racial discrimination in higher education says that race can only be used as a plus factor. It can't be decisive in practice. It can't be a defining feature. It can't be the predominant factor. When Asian American kids are 8 times less likely to be admitted in the same band of academic achievement, you don't think that at least suggests a facial case of racial discrimination?
Well, I think
Asian
that's the question that you look at for the underlying facts to know. I don't remember exactly the words of the Supreme Court opinions, but they seem pretty much exactly, what you just said. You can't have a rigid quota. You can't have a fixed. This was the consequence of the Gratz case, which was the companion case to Gritter. Gritter was the University of Michigan Law School. Gratz was University of Michigan as a university. With respect to Gritter, the court said it was a holistic approach and was permissible. With respect to Gratz, it said it was a fixed ratio or a fixed number and not permissible. But those are things you find out by discovery in the case and examination of what the actual practices of the university were, and I have no idea what they were.
Judge, did anyone in the Biden administration consult with you about the decision to drop the lawsuit against Yale University?
No, I have assiduously kept out of those. It's not appropriate for me to be examining anything like that unless you confirm me.
Will the Department of Justice, under your leadership, pursue cases of obvious racial discrimination in higher education?
Well, if you put it that way, the answer is, of course, yes. Obvious.
Well, I think this presents an obvious case of discrimination against Asian Americans. I suspect some Asian American parents and their kids are a little disappointed in those answers, Judge. I want to turn to the...
I just want to say I'm only giving the answer to what the Supreme Court said the law was. I can't do any better than that.
Eight times less likely to be admitted?
My answer was you have to look at the facts inside.
Okay, I want to turn to another very important topic, which is the rising rates of violent crime in the country. According to the FBI's crime statistics, only 45% of violent crimes in this country result in an arrest. Would it be better or worse if 100% of violent crimes in this country resulted in arrest and prosecution instead of just 45%?
Would be better if the Congress gave the department enough money to arrest every single person. I assume you're talking both about state crimes and federal crimes.
That's according, yes, to Department of Justice, FBI crime statistics.
So those
45%.
are almost all, or a large percentage, are talking about local crimes. So
Do you
yes,
think do you think the department today solves too many crimes or prosecutes too many criminals?
The Justice Department?
Yes.
I think it may bring charges in areas which are not a good allocation of its resources, but I don't think it has sufficient resources to, and probably never will, to pursue every crime. That seems impossible.
One final point, Judge, I just want to get on the record. We spoke about this last week in our telephone call about the importance of state and local law enforcement to work together in a collaborative and cooperative fashion with the Department of Justice, both its local U.S. attorneys and the law enforcement agencies that you oversee. I was glad to know that you agree with me. Those partnerships are vital to reduce crime and keep our community safe. I just wanted to give you the chance to put that on the record today.
Yes, absolutely. My experience in Oklahoma City was close cooperation with the DA's office, the local police there, and with the governor and with the state police. I think these joint task forces are an exceedingly good idea. They're a force multiplier. So I'm completely on board with this. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Judge.
Senator